You are listening to the Think Brick Australia podcast. Think Brick Australia represents the clay, brick and paver manufacturers of Australia. Brick by brick, our podcast will discuss technical information and architectural case studies with special guests. I'm your host, Elizabeth McIntyre, the CEO of Think Brick Australia. On today's podcast, I'm here in windy Perth, but I'm excited to be with Daniel Aisenson from With Architecture Studio, the winners of the 2022 Horbury Hunt Commercial Award for Kiara College. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
So, Daniel, we're just going to start with your childhood, and it's a little bit different from most of the people that I've interviewed. Can you describe to me where you grew up?
Yeah, I grew up in Argentina. I was born there and I pretty much spent my first 25 years. I come from a family of architects, so my father and my grandfather are and were architects. So I pretty much grew up in you may call it an architectural environment, from very early ages.
And I guess you're one of the first people we've had out of all of these episodes that has grown up in an architectural environment. For you, what did that sort of look like?
Well, I guess it was normal.
Yeah.
But it was everywhere. I mean, I do remember going to site visits with my dad. And on Saturdays, back in Argentina, back in the days, you didn't need all the PPE and anyone could access building sites. And as a kid, sometimes I would go there by myself. People would know me and I would just be there. During weekends, there was one allocated person for the whole site that would cook a barbecue for all the workmen there. Mm-hmm. So sometimes going there it was a nice communal experience,
right.
Call it. And then being as a child, going to my dad's office and playing around with rotarings and pens and with all the stencils and doing my first drawings with ink and working during the holidays doing the blueprints.
Yes.
Those days. That were done with ammonia machines, and so it was all part of an upbringing and the travelling and visiting, kind of endless walks throughout many places in the States or Europe.
Yes,
going
all around the world.
Almost in pilgrimage, going to visit fantastic pieces of architecture or just being in cities, old cities, and going to see cathedrals and churches and. That was very, influential. And in fact, that's where I decided that I wanted to follow the path and be an architect.
Did it come naturally to you?
I have to say that, yes,
yeah.
It did. And despite within my family, it was kind of like, take your time, don't feel the pressure,
right.
Et cetera, et cetera. That's where things ended up.
And I mean, I'm just curious, did your father and grandfather, was that a family business?
It was, and it still is. It's
yes.
A rather important or large practice back in Argentina. It's called Aisenson Arquitectos. Mm-hmm. And it started in the late 30s.
Right.
I believe, it's the second oldest architectural practice in the country. Mm-hmm. And it's still going. So I have another brother who's involved in the practice as well.
Okay, well, we're going to get to a little bit later why you're here and not there. But where did you study? So are you sort of saying that when everyone was saying take your time, was this in high school or was this when you were choosing?
That was, towards the end.
Yep.
High school and then, yes, choosing and making that decision.
And then when you were being sort of taken around the world or at this young age, were there any architects outside of your father and your grandfather that had made an impression on you? Or?
I think at the beginning, more than architects, it was spaces.
Yeah.
I mean, as an adolescent or even as a child, you grab a kit and put it in, either Notre Dame or Beauvais, the tallest kind of Gothic cathedral ever built, or in Paris in the Sainte-Chapelle, which is, incredibly transparent. All you can see is light coming in through the vitraux. It was an astonishing experience. It really impacts you from a perception point of view. Mm. And understanding how the meaning of religion in a different way. That was back in the 14th century. It's called social media, because it was a way that in those days the church had to, kind of disseminate a message.
That's right.
It's through their buildings.
Yeah. And just out of curiosity, is your father's firm, was that commercial or residential or both?
It's mainly multi-residential.
Right, okay.
And always that has been the key kind of area of expertise, but you would say it's commercial. Yes.
Yeah, okay. So you're at university, or you've chosen university, and you've chosen architecture. And where did you study?
I studied in Buenos Aires at the Universidad de Buenos Aires, and I graduated there. So.
And what was it like for you? I mean, did you find university what you expected? I mean, you already knew a lot about what architecture entailed. Did it fulfill that for you? Or?
I mean, you're coming out of high school where you do all those things that you don't like and you have to do, and then all of a sudden you go into university, and then you're you know, or at least I found myself very comfortable in my element. But then towards the middle of the career, you start breaking out. I mean, you start being challenged, and you start really venturing out of that comfort zone and exploring other avenues, other ways of thinking, definitely, you know, opening up to what's going on in the world that is less related to, you know, tradition and where you come from.
What would be the biggest thing you took from university that you probably didn't expect?
I think that university was a fantastic excuse to explore it.
Okay.
It's exploration.
Yes.
You know, and I think that, you know, the minute you got a book in your hands that you find, you know, attractive, wow, that's a find. And the minute you discover new things, or, you know, kind of are permeated by, let's call it either thought or what others are doing, that I think was very enriching.
Yeah.
You know? And I think also that experience that you spend a lot of time at university.
Yes.
I mean, now it's slightly a bit different. There's less contact hours with the teachers, and I think a lot of things.
Well, learning is different now, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And spending long hours at uni or with other students in the studio, or, you know, long nights. That's also something that was very enriching.
Yeah.
Enriching because I met a lot of people. You learn from others as well.
Yeah. And Daniel, you finished university, and then where do you go?
So towards the end of my uni years, I started being attracted towards reading and philosophy, and also looking towards the East, so India, China.
Okay.
So when I finished university, I wouldn't say in record time, but I did it non-stop.
Yeah.
So I said, enough, I'm taking a year off, and I did travel a bit.
Okay.
Then and there, I took a sabbatical.
Nice.
And first, it was 1996, so I went to the UAA, the International Architectural Conference that was in Barcelona, and then would be doing a bit of pilgrimage, you would call it.
Yes.
I took some time and visited Alvar Aalto's office. I went to Finland, and then, you know, flew to India and Nepal and Thailand and Vietnam, etc., etc. So it was another very enriching experience during that time. And well, it was so rich that I ended up meeting my now wife, and that's the reason why I ended up in Perth.
Right. But before that, you went back?
I went back after 1 year, and then I spent another 3 years in Argentina.
Yes.
I then moved to Sydney. I spent 2.5 years in Sydney, and then both me and my partner moved to London.
Oh, wow.
Where I did a master's at the Architectural Association. That went for about 1.5 years. And then from there, I stayed working for about 2 years at Foster & Partners. And then decided to start the journey back.
Okay.
And part of that journey was to come here to Perth and have a little vacation and connect with my partner's family. And then keep going back to the Eastern Seaboard, where I had, you know, some potential jobs aligned and where I was looking to go. And that was when we started a family. So we decided to stay here for a while, which was quite frightening. I've always lived in big cities, and I was really attracted to, you know, that kind of buzzing urban environments. So thinking about Perth was a bit of a challenge at the beginning. And then I met Jeff Wan and then Dick Donaldson were the two heads of Donaldson and Wan, and started with them in 2005. The rest is history.
And I'd be interested to get your perspective on, I guess, Australian architecture. You've been all around the world. What sort of stands out to you as the key differences?
It was interesting because I remember being in London and the commenting there with colleagues how interesting it was that none of the, let's call it, architectural firms didn't work more in Australia, or didn't have more of a presence in Australia. And, kind of the reverse, reflecting on the fact that, renowned architects by then, that there was a different image, from Australian architecture outside of Australia. And that's possibly there is a stereotype that Australian architecture deals with weather and deals with sun and deals with shade. And then from Europe or South America, you see, or you used to see the architecture of Glenmark, and it is quite striking. I mean, now it's very, very different because the word regionalism has, kind of taken a very, very different route. At one point, when I was a student, there was, kind of all that movement, the critical regionalism, and architects from Spain, started coming up, and Caesar and sort of Moda, and then you started seeing architects from South America as well. But I think that time has passed, and the whole, I guess, global thinking has taken on that. So, of course, now you do see the big firms or international practices with a presence in Australia and big architectural, kind of practice from Australia working in the Middle East.
Yes. And how did you kind of address, I mean, I have been here in Perth on Christmas Day when it was 46 degrees, and out of all of the Australian cities, I think Perth is one of the most extreme climates. And also, I mean, it's built from that. There's this real strong European influence. Obviously, there's a lot of brick. Was that something that you had to get used to, or?
Interesting, when we decided that we were staying, we rented a house. It was a weatherboard kind of house. And it was hot in summer and cold in winter. And then when we finally made the decision to stay in Perth for a while, and we went and bought a house, and that house was like a fibre house. Again, kind of cold in winter and hot in summer. I was going like, there's something in here. It's like, the houses in Perth are really, really poorly designed for weather. Yeah. To the point that the house we bought was, kind of completely in a lane, had to be restumped, holes in the wall and, kind of all these things. So I never really had the experience of living in a brick house in Perth, but definitely the old kind of brick and tile houses. You go there in winter, they're very cold. It's only in the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years that, people start thinking about reverse brick veneer and, being a bit more climate conscious and, things start changing.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about Kiara College and what that project was and how it came about.
One of the things that we've been doing for a while is educational architecture. And it's something that started way before I joined the practice. But I managed to, almost join them and adopt a discourse and an approach. So, schools are usually quite big campuses. Here the typical secondary college or high school is developed in 12 or 13 hectare sites.
Yes.
So we treat these projects almost as a mini urbanism exercise.
One of the biggest things I noticed coming back to Perth all the time is that it's just everything's kind of spread out, different from just cities, but particularly on the East Coast,
And the way the city has been growing on a very kind of narrow linear corridor north and south means that the road go first and then the subdivisions, and then what you call the civic infrastructure. So in your typical suburb, you will see your mall, you have your Bunnings, and you have your petrol station, your McDonald's, your kind of vet, and that's the civic infrastructure. That's the civic space. So we are very conscious that with projects in schools, we have an opportunity to provide something else than just a place for learning for the community. And therefore we deal with the image of these schools and the way people move, in and out, have good conversations with the clients or the schools about, the way they share the facilities with the wider community. And usually we try to provide a bit of respite from that intense development, suburban development that occurs in the suburbs. So when it came to developing Kiara, I mean, just to give you an idea, Kiara follows a series of projects that are focused more on the inner suburbs and their expansions or additions to existing campuses. So in the, you would say, 2005 to 2015, there was a lot of emphasis in new campuses. So, go for growth. And I think 2015, 16, and thereafter, a lot of projects have been coming online which deal with additions or renovations to existing schools. And usually the way these projects are put together is, there's a statement of need, the school needs A, B and C. And then that is put into a business case, costed and then, put out to industry. So what we really try to do is go beyond the individual needs of a school or of a college. So in this case, you went into Kiara and the first thing you see is car parking, trees, and very difficult to identify where the entry is. You could not orient yourself. You go into the admin and nearby there's a courtyard that no one uses because it's a different level, from where the students are. And start to understand that the campus as an entity has little presence towards the street and the community. And you start, kind of digging out or in conversation with the stakeholders, which is the school. What is the school about? So in this case, Kiara, what's very, very interesting is very culturally diverse. It's not a school that is buzzing in terms of their population, so they've been quite stable. In fact, they have been losing some students to other schools or other school developments nearby. So as much as they wanted, a new performing arts centre and a student service kind of facilities, I think that they also needed or wanted to revamp their identity, to become a new campus and be attractive towards the community.
And I mean, one of the things the jury loved about the project, and I loved, was the way that the brick kind of comes out of the ground and it feels like it's really sort of rising. And then also just how you've used the two different colours and sort of really direct people to the entrance.
So very interesting from day dot. The intent, there was a very clear intent to consolidate the development. So again, in that building, we're talking particularly about the performing arts and the administration building, the student services. It was an intent not to express them as two buildings, but to express them as one building, consolidate, increase the footprint, and take the forecourt, also the courtyard, the centre of the school, and the landscape area to the back to the street. So that way you consolidate a development footprint, and out of that development footprint, so create a background to then bring the building up. Brick was a natural choice, and we've been working with bricks now for a long time. And it's a way of progressing and developing our architectural language and identity and attitude. And this was no exception. So if you go back to the design, performing arts centres are quite restricted in their openings because you want to maintain a controlled environment. So the intent was to almost build a campus marker by, building an object.
Yes.
And all the fenestration to the administration is facing the courtyard. So that gives you a really, welcoming background, to the new entry. Because of the way the campus is configured, we saw the opportunity for, that building, again, and when I say that building is the two programmatic aspects.
Yeah.
To become one building, but also to become a welcoming statement, into the campus. And that is when the whole brick envelope starts developing two components. One of interiority, so that's taking the curves with the white brick, and exterior component, which is expressed, throughout the red brick. So I guess it's a reference back to classic language. So you have a little kind of podium that is expressed in slightly different bricks. Those are the Byford Reds.
Yes.
So they're not your classic red-orange. They are bricks that we developed 2011 with Midland Brick.
Yeah.
And there's a story to that. So back in 2009, we did quite a large project on redeveloping a school, which was Governor Sterling Senior High School.
Yeah.
And there was a determination there to go back to brick. I mean, then the office had been embarked in several high schools using concrete and concrete block and tilted panel. But we could not do a building that wasn't brick in Midland.
Okay,
or in Woodbridge.
Yes.
So looking through the yards, I remember seeing in a corner a bag of bricks that I go, those bricks. And they had like a purple sheen.
Yes.
But they were not glazed. So speaking with Chris, I asked, where's this kind of bricks coming from? And he said, they're from Geraldton bricks.
Geraldton bricks, yeah.
So, came to know that they were the only remaining stack in WA by then.
Yeah.
And they were producing bricks, cooking them in the old way, where most of the larger producers shifted towards tunnel kilns.
Yes, yeah.
So those bricks, there's a process by which you starve the kiln of oxygen towards the end of the process and they burn, basically.
Yes.
So we used those bricks for Governor Sterling.
Yes.
But it was a difficult process.
Right.
Because it was difficult to maintain supply.
Yes.
And a lot of anecdotes, throughout that project. Anyway, after in subsequent projects, we go, how can we do this using a tunnel kiln?
Yeah.
So with Chris, he did a few runs and achieved, kind of that brick with a bit of a sheen. And we call them Byford Reds because they were then we were doing a school in Byford. So there's that podium or that plinth,
yes.
Which has a different stack. And you can see that contrast between the Midland red and that kind of Byford red, which is a bit of a sheen. It's quite subtle and it's quite pleasing to see how it came.
Yeah.
And then obviously the crown of the building done in white aluminium cladding.
Yeah.
So in a way that's quite a unique or quite a remarkable building because despite being subject to an incredible amount of constraints. I mean, we're talking about public buildings. So public buildings, public schools.
Yep.
And you actually go there and experience the build type and the build quality. It was quite remarkable to try to pull this one out. Where by using brick, we were able to explore kind of that almost tectonic relationship between the two type of bricks, the red and the white, and kind of subtle differentiation at that plinth level with the Byford Reds. But also, not easy to achieve, but the parapets have no kind of flashing protruding off, but the flashing is recessed and it's all basically bricks on end. So you can see that, and they tuck under the white cladding. So it's quite a consistent, kind of building envelope with that main entry, there's that welcoming statement and those oculi, bringing light into that courtyard.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, it is hard to achieve with those parapets. It looks easy, but it's difficult to achieve.
Yeah. So I would say the building looks relatively simple. So it's simple in form. It's not engaging in formal gymnastics.
No, but I think the way that you've just spoken about the choice of the bricks, I mean, it's really fascinating. So much thought has gone into that. How long did construction take?
Well, interesting. It probably took a bit more than what it was meant to be. Buildings like that take around 55 weeks to build.
Yeah.
Okay, just over a year. Plus contingencies, or wet weather, etc.
Yeah.
But we were hit by COVID.
Yep.
And problem was not the supply.
No.
Okay. So the problem was labour. So the builder was losing brickies left, right, and centre. And it was probably quite a miracle that still there was a consistent look.
Yes.
Because there were probably many different brickies working on it at the same time. Yeah.
Well, don't you think so much for that? And as you know, the jury loved it. I know our members loved it. And it is, I just think it's a big sort of monolithic building that I feel it has got exactly all of those things that you said, very subtle aspects to it, but at the same time really joining everything together and having that beautiful presence about it.
Look, it was a great joy for us a building to put together, but also it was quite meaningful for us because about 2015, there was a big shift where Donaldson and Warren became with Architecture Studio.
Yes.
And a couple of buildings, of which Kiara is one of them, was the first series of buildings that were not a crossover but was started as with. On top of that, the people involved, project architect, design architect, have been with us, for a long time, so since they were students, and now it's part of the journey into becoming now their associates.
Yes.
And they were fully responsible for this building. So not only it's a great outcome from an architectural point of view, but it's a milestone for us as it really represents new identity with new people taking over and coming and starting a new journey into the practice.
I love that. Thank you so much for your time. We're going to do the rapid fire questions.
Fantastic.
There are no wrong answers.
Let's do it.
Okay, reading the news, a newspaper or online?
Online.
Handwriting or typing?
A lot of handwriting, a lot of typing, both, depending on what I'm writing.
Okay. For sketching ideas and concepts, would you use a pencil, pen or e-pen?
Pen.
Do you like to read books or listen to audiobooks?
Read.
What's important to you, style or substance?
Both, of course.
Coffee or tea?
Whiskey. No, coffee.
I know someone who says coffee in the morning and, wine at night. But TV shows or movies?
I think now that you have to add serious, TV, because at the moment it's a bit of both. Big fan of movies because it's 2 hours.
Yes.
And going to deliver the message.
Antique or brand new?
No, I would say brand new.
Call or text?
Definitely cool.
Travel back in time or into the future?
Back in time.
Exterior or interior?
Exterior.
Video games or board games?
Board games.
Complex or simple with relation to design?
Simple. But simple is complex.
You have to be very complex to reach simple.
Otherwise, it's impossible to do it.
Daniel, thank you so much for joining us.
Look, no, thank you for coming to our offices and pleasure being with you.
If you have enjoyed this podcast, please follow, rate and review our podcast. We are always looking for new ways to think brick. If you have an idea of what you'd like to hear about, there's a link in our show notes to let us know.